Hi, welcome to this short explanation of the measures of crime. Measures of crime in Deviance, there's three of them. So we've got the official crime statistics, we've got the victim surveys and self-report studies. So official crime statistics are the police, the crimes reported to the police, recorded by the police, crimes in terms of convictions in the courts. So those convicted in courts, and also the victim survey called the British Crime Survey, which is a national victim survey, has become part of the official picture of crime published by the Home Office each year. The official picture of crime is mainly looking at police reports traditionally, but when we discuss it we could refer to the victim surveys as part of the picture today. Official crime statistics, obviously it's quantitative data. It's seen as useful because it's statistical and it's a national picture of crime, so it's seen as having representative advantage of more representativeness than other studies. It could be seen by the functionalists as useful. They take a positivist approach. They say we can look at the patterns and trends from the official crime statistics. Functionalists have used the patterns and trends from official crime statistics, and they take it on face value that the offenders are working class, young, male, often from ethnic minority backgrounds and from cities, and then their explanations are based on taking those patterns at face value as if they're real. And so if we look at examples of that, you've got Durkheim, who talks about the issue of things like social integration as an explanation of why crime takes place in cities, like as a result of urbanisation and loss of community. Merton looks at working class crime, and a lot of the theories of crime are focused on a class-based explanation because the main offenders are from lower status backgrounds according to the official picture. So we could then talk about the solutions to crime and say that a lot of the theories and explanations are based on the assumption that the official picture is accurate, or that there's class-based problems that cause crime, and so solutions might involve welfare benefits, providing more opportunities in education, or even go as far as to try to, suggest communism as a replacement of capitalism, since class is caused by capitalism, class divisions. There are obviously weaknesses with official crime statistics. They're seen as flawed and distorted. So they're seen as flawed and distorted because they're socially constructed. Interpretivists and interactionists take an interpretivist perspective. Interactionists taking an interpretivist perspective would say the data from this statistical source is lacking in depth, doesn't provide enough understanding in the mind of the deviant, why they do things according to definitions in their mind, interpretations. They also argue that the police tend to get involved in labelling, and they stereotype offenders. So, in other words, working class young males from these ethnic minority backgrounds in cities are more likely to be labelled and stereotyped as criminals. This was also supported by the neo-Marxists, who argue, following the Marxist perspective, that poverty is caused by capitalism, crime is a response to capitalism. Crime can be not such a reality in the working class as is made out, so it could be exaggerated as a problem of the working class, where working class are criminalised. So the Marxists talk about the working class being criminalised. The neo-Marxists are influenced by both the interactionism view and the Marxist view. So they talk about moral panics and fear and anxiety about groups caused by the media. The police are responding to that, and that actually makes crime worse. There's labelling and stereotyping, and there's also poverty, and there's also this idea of the choices that people make due to their own definitions. So the neo-Marxists also add the idea of crime as a political act. Crime is a political act where young black males from working class backgrounds in cities are making a gesture of defiance against an unfair system. So that's the neo-Marxist view. The feminists would also criticise the official picture of crime, obviously talk about, they might accept the male-female crime ratio in the statistics, which is 5 to 1, female, male to female ratio of offenders, but they add the idea of hidden victims. So the feminists would say that there are hidden victims of crime which are not detected by the police. Like domestic violence, victims are often concealed or hidden. They also talk about the fact that the police have this attitude of a cooling off period where they used to encourage women to restore kind of emotional equilibrium before they decided whether to press charges or not. So they give women time to cool off because of traditional gender norms which suggest that women are emotional and irrational. So the feminists argue that traditional gender norms also mean that the police don't give women a chance to report their victimisation. So again, crimes are hidden, according to feminists. And there's also the idea of non-reporting and non-recording of crime, where there might be issues like fear, shame, embarrassment, which mean people are frightened of reprisal, revenge, and we've also got the issue of coughing and cuffing, where again the police are encouraging people to own up to a crime that they may not have committed for a plea bargain, or people's crimes are not investigated fully, which is cuffing, in order to again keep the crime rate down and the clearing up rate up. There's some fascinating figures on this. The victim surveys have shown some real problems with the reliability and validity of the official picture of crime. So in the first victim survey, which is 1983, the British Crime Survey, which is a national victim survey, they found that they ask over 16-year-olds whether they've been a victim of crime in the last 12 months. And this is a Home Office survey, it's not the police doing the survey. And the Victim Crime Survey shows, according to Simmons, 2002, 42% of crime and deviance is reported. So you can see the majority of crimes are not reported. 94% of those crimes that are reported are vehicle thefts, and 25.7% of those crimes reported are common assaults. And so, 94% of vehicle thefts are reported. So, majority of vehicle thefts are reported for insurance reasons, but only 25.7% of common assaults are estimated to have been reported. So, only a quarter of people actually report if they've been a victim of an assault where someone's threatened or actually touched them without consent in some way, whether it's hitting them or so on. So the victim surveys show that there's this dark figure of crime. Most crimes are not reported. People only report crimes out of self-interest for insurance reasons. And so, got some interesting figures there. We also know the issue with the police criminalising and focusing on certain groups and being unreliable. 12% of common assaults are recorded by the police, or were recorded by the police. So due to the victim surveys, they've had to bring in some changes to recording practices. Where since 1997 and then in 2002 again, they changed the recording practices so the police have to record all crimes. So the victim surveys are supported by left realists who also support the official crime statistics. So why is that? So the left realists would say that the official crime statistics picture is flawed. they acknowledge that there's the problem with the social construction of crime. There is a problem with saying that all young black males are criminals, and crime always takes place in cities. So there is this problem with the statistics where there's likely to be racism, there's likely to be prejudice in the police forces, there's likely to be institutional racism. However, the left realists say that while they are flawed, the statistics are basically overall truthful in the general patterns of crime that they illustrate. So although there's probably some exaggeration and some underrepresentation of some groups and some crimes, generally there are issues with certain communities and certain types of crime that need to be taken seriously and not just labelled as a kind of social construction, or not just denied as a picture rather than a reality. The left realists will say that the statistics are a reality. The reason they say this is because of the official statistics being backed up by the victim surveys. Because the victim surveys show that the offenders and victims come from the same disadvantaged backgrounds. The victim surveys show that offenders and victims both those groups come from working class, low income backgrounds, often youth, ethnic minorities in cities. Often the most disadvantaged groups are not only the offenders but also the victims of crime. And since the victims are disadvantaged, this makes them much more vulnerable as well. The left realists say we need to take crime seriously. The reason this is important is because the neo-Marxists said that crime is a political act. So they had this view of the offender as someone who's almost like a Robin Hood character. They're committing crime as a political act, as a gesture of defiance against an unfair system. But this doesn't explain a mugging. Why would someone rob from someone who's as poor as them? That's not a political act. It's not a gesture of defiance against an unfair system. It's someone who's vulnerable being harmed. The same could be said for rape. The same could be said for other crimes where people are disadvantaged, are harmed by crime. So the left realists found in the victim surveys it's the most disadvantaged people are victims of crime. Rather than denying crime takes place as much as the statistics show, rather than saying that it's a political act and it's someone doing something ultimately that's good, the left realists are saying crime is harmful, victims are disadvantaged, we need to take the crime pattern seriously, and the victim surveys back this up. The problems with the victim surveys, before we look at the problems, there's also the London Islington survey. The London and Islington survey showed some really fascinating statistics. So, for example, that white young females in Islington were 30 times greater risk of an assault compared to white females over the age of 45. So it showed some age patterns there. So it's not random. You are at greater risk of being a victim if you're a younger female. But it also showed a 14 times greater risk of sexual assault for urban females in particular areas. So it shows that in certain low status areas, urban females are at much greater risk of sexual assault. So again, we need to take these patterns seriously and do something about them, rather than just saying that they're a kind of figment of the authorities' imagination. There are problems with the victim surveys. So the victim surveys have the problem of self-definition, because number one, the person who's a victim may not define themselves as a victim. It's the same problems with the OCS, where they don't report it to the police as well. If you think about someone who has a fight after going out to a nightclub, they might have been partly at fault, so they might not see themselves as a victim in a traditional way. Number two, the respondents' definitions are not the same as the legal definitions. Someone might not see abuse in the same way as the law sees abuse. Rape can be seen as having grey areas. So there are some issues there. Also memory, they may not remember what happened. And the interviewer effect, the characteristics of the interviewer, the fact that it's an interview, it's an artificial situation, can affect the results. Number 3, households was studied with victim surveys, or are studied. It leaves out white-collar crime like in businesses. And also victimless crimes like drug use or prostitution. Those can be seen as victimless in the sense that the person who's consuming those things, taking part in those forms of life and behaviour, may not define themselves as victims again. And lastly, omits young victims. So young people under 16 are left out, and so again, abuse and so on is probably undetected to some degree. So the victim surveys have many strengths. Only 23% of indictable offences are cleared up, according to Simmons 2002. And it's estimated that only 3% of crimes end in a conviction. So we can see that the victim surveys add a great deal to the picture of crime, because so many crimes are not reported to the police and not solved by the police. Then we've got the self-report studies. Self-report studies involve people being asked if they've been an offender, if they've committed certain crimes or deviant acts. They're often studying petty acts, like whether you've ridden a bike without lights on at night when it's dark, whether you've stolen something from a supermarket. Often less serious crimes were covered by these self-report studies. They often involved a young sample and school students. What they find generally is that the official picture of crime overrepresents some groups and underrepresents others. So Steve Box is a Marxist, 1981. He said that the self-report studies are useful. He says that it shows that we need to reject the view from the official statistics that the working class are more likely to be involved in crime. He is a Marxist, so his view about the criminalisation of the working class will be supported by the self-report studies. So it shows that the middle class are underrepresented in crime. Self-report studies show that the working class are overrepresented in a picture of crime from the official picture of crime. Graham and Bowling said the lower classes are more likely to admit to more serious offences. So there's a bias in the official picture of crime. A classic study is Chambliss. Chambliss studies saints and roughnecks. So guess who the saints were? The saints were middle-class young males who were viewed as less problematic and less deviant and less troublesome than the working-class males who were in another gang called the roughnecks. So this classic study shows that there's a lot of problems with the official picture of crime due to processes like labelling. Some examples of self-report studies are Campbell, 1981, and Farrington, 1973, a longitudinal study over time of delinquency. There are some issues with self-report studies and problems. So some of the problems are, firstly, that it looks at petty crime, so it doesn't look at serious crime. So while it would be, seen as useful by Marxists and seen as useful by interpretivists, and also self-report studies show some useful things because it looks at how female criminality is underrepresented. So that would be supported by the chivalry thesis, which will look at with gender. There are problems with the truthfulness and accuracy of the self-report studies. Truth and accuracy can be affected by